These videos are based on real events, experiences, and accounts. However, all names, locations, and identifying details have been deliberately changed to protect the privacy and safety of those involved. Viewer discretion is advised. My name is Daniel Reeves, and if you had known me growing up, you would have probably remembered me for one thing: my teeth. They were bad. Not just crooked or slightly off, but the kind that made people do a double take before pretending not to stare. I learned early how to smile with my mouth closed, how to laugh without showing too much. It became second nature. Because of that, dental work was always in my future. But for reasons I won't get into, it kept getting delayed. One appointment turned into another year, then another. Before I knew it, I had graduated college, and the problem I had been avoiding finally caught up with me. My wisdom teeth weren't just impacted, they were causing constant pain. So I had no choice. I scheduled the surgery. The procedure itself wasn't the worst part. It was what came after. The pain was relentless. It didn't come in waves or dull aches. It was sharp, invasive, like something was digging inside my jaw and refusing to stop. The only way I could manage it was through medication. The dentist had prescribed 2 different types, and I ended up creating a system just to survive. Every 3 hours, I would wake up, take a pill, drink some water, and go back to sleep. Then repeat, again and again. At first, it felt manageable, but after a few days, something started to feel off. My body wasn't built for that kind of sleep cycle. I wasn't getting real rest. It felt like I was stuck in this strange loop, half awake, half dreaming, never fully present. By the 4th or 5th night, I didn't feel like myself anymore. I remember one night in particular. It must have been around 4 in the morning. I woke up like I always did, groggy and disoriented, took my medication and tried to fall back asleep, but something wasn't right. It was hot, unnaturally hot. Our house was always cool at night, especially in my room, but that night the air felt thick, suffocating. I kicked off the covers, flipped my pillow over, tried every trick I knew, but nothing helped. It felt like the walls themselves were holding heat. After a few minutes of tossing around, I gave up and got out of bed. The only thing I could think of was opening the window. I never slept with it open, but I didn't care anymore. The moment I slid it up, a rush of cool air poured in. Relief. I climbed back into bed and lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep to take me. But it didn't. That's when I heard it. At first, it was faint, subtle enough that I thought it might have just been part of my imagination, or maybe a sound I wasn't used to hearing with the window open. A scratching noise. Slow, irregular, like something dragging across a rough surface. I turned my head slightly, listening more carefully. The sound came again, a little louder this time. Not sharp like claws on glass, more like nails or something hard brushing across wood or shingles. Then it moved. I could hear it shifting position, traveling from one side of the roof to the other. The realization hit me almost immediately. An animal. We lived near a wooded area, raccoons, squirrels, even the occasional stray cat. It wasn't unusual for them to climb onto the roof. We'd had problems before, things getting into the attic, making nests where they didn't belong. I sighed, already annoyed. The last thing I wanted to do at that hour was deal with it, but I knew if I ignored it, it could turn into a bigger problem. My dad had made that clear more than once. So I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and forced myself out of bed. The house was completely silent as I made my way downstairs. That deep, hollow kind of silence that only exists in the middle of the night. Every step I took felt louder than it should have been. In the garage, I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the shelf. It was one of those industrial ones my dad swore by, bright enough to light up half the yard. Perfect. I headed toward the back door, opened it quietly, and stepped outside. The air was cool, almost cold compared to my room. For a moment, I just stood there, letting it wash over me. Then I clicked on the flashlight and pointed it up toward the roof. Nothing. Just shingles, still and empty. I frowned, sweeping the beam slowly across the surface. No movement, no sound. It was like whatever had been up there had vanished. Great, I muttered under my breath. I started walking along the side of the house, angling the light upward, trying to cover as much area as possible. If it was still up there, the light would scare it off. That was the plan, at least. I reached the front corner of the house, where the roof sloped higher. The shadows were deeper there, harder to see through. I adjusted my grip on the flashlight and lifted it higher. For a second, nothing happened. Then, something moved. It was quick, just a flicker at the edge of the beam, but I saw it. My heart skipped. I snapped the flashlight toward the spot, the beam cutting through the darkness, and that's when I saw it. Not an animal, not anything I had expected. There was a person standing on my roof, completely still, completely naked. The light hit them full on, freezing them in place like a photograph. Their skin looked pale, too pale, almost gray under the harsh glare. Their body was thin but not weak. There was something tense about the way they stood, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. For a moment, neither of us moved. I couldn't. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. There was no logical explanation for how someone could be standing on my roof in the middle of the night. Then I screamed. It just came out, loud and uncontrolled, tearing through the silence. And the moment I did, the figure moved. Not like a normal person. Faster, way faster. They jerked back, almost recoiling from the light, then darted across the roof with a speed that didn't look natural. Bare feet slopped against the shingles as they moved, quick and erratic. My grip tightened on the flashlight as I tried to follow them, my hands shaking. What the hell? They were heading toward the back of the house, toward my room, and before I could even think, before I could stop myself, I turned and ran. I don't remember making the decision to run. My body just did it. 1 second I was standing there, frozen under the weight of what I had just seen. And the next I was sprinting along the side of the house, my feet slamming against the ground, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly in front of me. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get back inside, to lock the doors and pretend none of this was happening. But something stronger pushed me forward. Adrenaline, maybe, or fear twisting itself into something reckless. As I rounded the corner toward the backyard, I shouted for my dad. "Dad! Dad, get up!" My voice cracked, loud enough to tear through the quiet house. I didn't even know if he could hear me, but I kept yelling anyway, hoping, praying that he would wake up. I reached the back just in time to see the figure. They were at the edge of the roof now, directly above my bedroom window. For a split second, they crouched there, balanced perfectly like they had done it 100 times before. Then they jumped. The sound of their body hitting the concrete was sickening, a heavy, bone-jarring thud that echoed through the yard. I actually flinched, instinctively bracing for the kind of scream you'd expect from a fall like that. But there was no scream, no hesitation. The moment they hit the ground, they moved. They got up instantly, too fast, and before I could even react, they charged straight at me. I barely had time to raise the flashlight before they slammed into me. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs. My back hit the ground hard, and the flashlight flew out of my hand, skidding somewhere into the darkness. For a split second, everything went black. Then the pain hit. Not from the fall, from them. Their hands were on my face, scratching, clawing. It wasn't like a normal attack. There was no rhythm to it, no hesitation. Just frantic, violent movement, like they were trying to tear me apart piece by piece. I screamed, thrashing beneath them, trying to push them off, but they were stronger than they looked. Way stronger. Their grip was tight, fingers digging into my skin, nails scraping across my cheeks, my forehead, dangerously close to my eyes. I could feel blood almost immediately, warm and wet, running down the side of my face. "Get off of me," I shouted, kicking, swinging blindly. They didn't respond. They didn't say a word. Just those horrible sounds, grunting, breathing, something almost animal-like coming from their throat. For a moment, a terrifying thought crossed my mind.
this isn't a person. It looked like one, sure, but nothing about the way they moved, the way they attacked. It didn't feel human. I was losing it. I could feel it. My arms were getting weaker, my movements slower. Panic surged through me, sharp and overwhelming. I genuinely thought that was it, that this was how it ended, in my own backyard, torn apart by something I couldn't even understand. Then the back door burst open. "Daniel!" My dad's voice. Heavy footsteps pounded across the yard, and seconds later, the weight on top of me shifted violently. My dad grabbed the attacker, yanking them off me with a force I didn't know he still had. They struggled immediately, violently. I scrambled backward across the ground, gasping for air, my vision swimming as I wiped blood from my eyes. Through the blur, I could see my dad wrestling with them, trying to hold them down. "Call the police," he shouted. But before I could even move, the figure twisted out of his grip. It didn't make sense. My dad is a strong guy, but this thing slipped away like it weighed nothing. For a brief second, it turned toward us. I saw its face clearly for the first time, and I wish I hadn't. Its eyes looked wrong, not just wild or angry, empty, like there was nothing behind them at all. Its mouth hung slightly open, lips dry and cracked, its entire expression frozen somewhere between pain and something far worse. Then it ran, not away from us in a straight line, but toward the edge of the yard, moving with that same unnatural speed. In seconds, it reached the fence, grabbed the top, and pulled itself over like it was nothing. And then it was gone, just like that. The only sound left was the faint crashing of branches as it disappeared into the woods behind our house. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating. My dad stood there, breathing hard, staring at the fence like he expected the thing to come back. I didn't move. I couldn't. My whole body was shaking, the adrenaline slowly wearing off and leaving behind nothing but pain and confusion. "Jesus Christ," my dad muttered. That's when he turned to me and his expression changed instantly. "Daniel, your face." I didn't need a mirror to know it was bad. I could feel it. The stinging, the wetness, the warmth of blood still running down my skin. Everything after that happened fast. The hospital, the bright lights, doctors asking questions I couldn't fully answer. They cleaned the wounds, stitched what needed stitching, gave me shots for infections I didn't even want to think about. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. But I couldn't. There was no explanation that made sense. The police came, of course, took statements, asked about intruders, about anyone who might have had a reason to target us. But what was I supposed to tell them? That a naked man had been crawling on my roof like an animal? That he moved faster than anyone I'd ever seen? That he didn't speak, didn't even seem to think? They searched the woods briefly, but it was useless, too dark, too vast. Whoever or whatever that was, it was gone. By the time we got home, the sun was starting to rise. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Normal, quiet, like nothing had happened. But it had. My dad later told me he found marks on the roof, scratches, deep ones, like something had been trying to dig through the shingles into the attic. That thought stuck with me. Not the attack, not even the face. The idea that it wasn't just passing through, it was trying to get inside. We installed security cameras a few days later, extra locks, motion lights, everything we could think of. But none of it answered the questions that kept me up at night. Who was that? Where did he come from? And why our house? Even now, I still catch myself listening sometimes. Late at night, when everything is quiet, waiting for that scratching sound to come back.
I've never been the kind of person who believes in things without explanations. I like logic, patterns, cause and effect. If something happens, there's a reason for it. Maybe you don't understand it right away, but it's there. That's what I used to believe, anyway. This happened last New Year's Eve, and I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. My name is Ethan Cole. I was living in Chicago at the time, working a decent job, keeping a pretty normal routine. Nothing unusual. That night, I had plans with two of my closest friends, Marcus and Lena. We started the evening at Marcus's apartment, just drinking, talking, the usual kind of low-key start before heading out. Around 10:30, we took a rideshare downtown to a rooftop party Lena had been invited to through a coworker. It wasn't the kind of place I'd normally go, too crowded, too loud, but it turned out to be better than expected. The view alone made it worth it. The skyline lit up, cold air biting just enough to keep you awake, music echoing off glass and steel. By 11:30, the place was packed. That's when I met her. She was standing near the bar, not really talking to anyone, not awkwardly, just comfortably alone. There was something about that caught my attention. Most people at parties like that cling to groups or at least pretend to be busy. She wasn't doing either. So I walked over. "Hey," I said, keeping it simple. She turned toward me and smiled like we already knew each other. "Hey." Her voice was calm, steady, not loud enough to compete with the music, but somehow I heard it clearly anyway. We started talking. At first, it was just the usual small talk. Where are you from? What do you do? But it didn't stay surface level for long. She had this way of responding that made conversations feel effortless, like you weren't trying to impress each other, you were just there. Her name was Mira. At least that's how she said it. Like Mira, she explained with a small laugh when I asked her to repeat it. I remember joking that I'd forget it in 5 minutes. She grabbed a pen from the bar and took my hand, writing it across the back of it in neat, careful letters. "Now you won't." There was something oddly deliberate about the way she did it. Not flirtatious, not playful, just certain. We ended up on the dance floor not long after that. I'm not even much of a dancer, but with her, it didn't feel awkward. Time moved strangely. At one point, I remember checking my phone and realizing it was already 11:58, 2 minutes to midnight. We counted down with the rest of the crowd, everyone shouting, glasses raised, music swelling to a peak. 3, 2, 1. The moment hit, loud and chaotic, people cheering, hugging, kissing, and yeah, we kissed. It felt natural, like the next step in something that had already been happening. After that, things moved fast. By around 12:30, she leaned in close and said, "Do you want to get out of here?" I didn't hesitate. We called a ride and left together, the noise of the party fading behind us as we stepped into the cold night air. The city felt quieter somehow, like everything had settled after the countdown. During the ride, we kept talking, that same easy rhythm, no pauses, no awkward silences. She told me she was originally from San Diego, that she was an artist, painting mostly, but used to do murals and street art before shifting into galleries. She had 2 cats, one named Cosmo, the other named Mia, her middle name apparently. "People always think that's weird," she said. "I don't," I replied. "It's memorable." She smiled at that. Little details like that stuck with me. I don't know why, but they did. The kind of things you don't usually remember after a night like that. We got back to my apartment sometime after 1. I'll skip over most of what happened next. It's not important in the way you think it might be. What matters is that it all felt normal, real. There was nothing strange about it at the time. Afterwards, we stayed up talking for a while. I learned more about her, random things that didn't seem significant then but would later become impossible to ignore. Her birthday was April 28th. Her dad worked in law, patents specifically. Her best friend growing up lived in a small town in Germany she said no one ever recognized the name of. "Hillesheim?" she repeated when I asked her to say it again. I remember thinking it was oddly specific. At some point, she mentioned her clothes smelled like the bar. I offered to wash them, and she accepted without hesitation. I tossed everything into the machine, gave her one of my t-shirts to sleep in. It all felt easy, like we'd done it before. We fell asleep sometime after that. I don't remember exactly when. The next thing I knew, I was waking up. Sunlight was filtering through the blinds, soft and quiet. For a second, everything felt completely normal. Then I reached out instinctively to the other side of the bed. Empty. I opened my eyes fully, blinking away the last traces of sleep. "Mira?" I called out. No response. I sat up, running a hand through my hair.
not thinking much of it. People leave early sometimes, it happens. Still, something felt off. I walked back toward the front door, and that's when I noticed it. The lock. Still engaged. I just stood there for a second, staring at it. My door doesn't lock automatically. You have to lock it from the inside before you go to bed or from the outside with a key. There's no way to close it behind you and have it lock on its own. And I hadn't unlocked it yet that morning, which meant I turned slowly, looking back into the apartment. A strange, creeping feeling started to settle in, because if the door was still locked from the inside, then how did she leave? Or worse, had she left it all?
My chest was tight, heart hammering in a way I hadn't felt since I ran track in high school. I couldn't rationalize it. Mira was gone, but the door was still locked. I retraced my steps through the apartment, checking every corner, every room. Nothing. No note, no phone, no trace of her. I tried to call her. No answer. Her number went straight to voicemail. I tried texting. Nothing. I waited a few minutes, hoping she was just running late or grabbing breakfast somewhere nearby, but the feeling in my gut told me this wasn't normal. Something about the way she had vanished didn't add up. I sat on the couch, gripping my phone, thinking through every interaction from the night before. Nothing had seemed strange at the time. She had been charming, funny, even a little mysterious, but nothing alarming. And yet now, with her completely disappeared, the whole night felt like a puzzle with a piece that didn't belong. Hours passed. I called Marcus and Lena, hoping maybe she had gone back to the party or was with someone else from the night. Neither of them had seen her. I checked her social media. No updates, no activity at all. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. That's when I noticed the envelope on the counter. I hadn't seen it before. It was plain, cream-colored, no markings. My name was written in careful script on the front. I hesitated, heart racing, but I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. One sentence, written in the same neat handwriting I remembered from her writing her name on my hand. You weren't supposed to see me leave. A chill ran down my spine. That wasn't a joke. That wasn't flippant or playful. Something about the tone of that note made my blood run cold. I looked around the apartment, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow, every corner. It was silent, too silent. I called the police again, trying to explain the situation. They took my statement, noted the envelope and the locked door, and assured me they'd look into it. But I could hear it in their voices. This was going to be one of those cases they'd file away as unexplained and move on. Over the next few days, I tried to process what had happened. Friends offered theories. Maybe she was into some sort of game. Maybe she had mental health issues. Maybe she was a professional prankster. But none of that explained the locked door. None of it explained how she had disappeared without a trace. And none of it explained the note. I started noticing little things afterward. Strange sounds outside my apartment at night, shadows moving just out of sight. Every time I thought I saw her in the street or in a cafe, my stomach twisted in panic. But when I looked again, she was gone. It was as if she existed only in brief, fleeting moments, never fully present. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia, that my brain was filling in gaps, creating a story where there wasn't one. But the memory of the note, the precision of the handwriting, the impossibility of her disappearance, they haunted me relentlessly. Weeks later, I got a message on my phone from an unknown number, no name, no profile picture, just a single message. You can't tell anyone. They won't believe you. I deleted it immediately, but the fear didn't go away. I started sleeping with the lights on, checking locks multiple times, watching shadows move across the walls. The rational part of me knew I was being irrational, but the irrational part, the part that had seen her vanish in an instant, leave that note and now reach out through an unknown number, refused to let go. Months passed. Life continued, but I couldn't shake the memory of Mira. I didn't see her again, and no one else reported any strange disappearances in the area, but I knew what I had experienced was real, even if no one else would believe it. I still wonder about her sometimes, who she really was, where she came from, and how she could move in and out of my life like a shadow, leaving only fear and questions behind. I've never told anyone the full story. Not Marcus, not Lena, not my family.
I don't think they'd understand, and I can't risk them thinking I'm losing my mind. But I keep the envelope folded neatly in a drawer, the handwriting still sharp and precise. It's the only proof I have that she existed at all. And maybe that's the scariest part of all, that someone or something could step into your life, touch it in ways you can't explain, and then disappear, leaving you questioning reality itself. Sometimes when the wind rustles just right against my window, or when I hear footsteps in an empty hallway, I think of her, and I know without a doubt she could be anywhere, watching, waiting, and I would never even see her come or go. The experience left me with more questions than answers, and maybe that's the point. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some people aren't meant to be understood. And some nights are meant to remind you that the world is bigger and stranger than you'll ever imagine. I don't know if I'll ever forget Mira, or the way she disappeared, or the sense that somewhere she's still out there, moving in ways I can't comprehend. But I do know one thing. I'll never ignore the strange, the inexplicable, or the impossible again. Because sometimes, the impossible isn't just real. It's right outside your door. I never thought moving to a quiet town in Oregon would lead to anything other than a slower pace of life. My name is Evan Clark, and after years in a hectic city job, I wanted nothing more than peace, space, and a little anonymity. The house I found was perfect. A modest single-story home with a small yard, a single bedroom, and just enough distance from the neighbors to feel private. I didn't have any pets, and that suited me fine. My work was flexible. I could spend hours at my desk or step outside to enjoy the solitude. It was the kind of life I'd imagined for years, simple and predictable. But as it often happens with predictability, the first cracks appeared in the most mundane moments. It started with my sleep, or rather the lack of it. I've always been a night owl, but the first few weeks after moving, my insomnia took on a new, almost unnatural rhythm. I'd fall asleep only to wake up in the dead of night, alert and uneasy, as if some part of me knew something was off. At first, I chalked it up to stress from the move, but soon the disturbances outside my window began. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I heard it for the first time. A slow, deliberate tapping on my window. Not the careless rapping of a branch or the wind against the glass, but something measured, purposeful. I froze in bed, straining to hear. The sound stopped, then returned, softer this time, as though whoever or whatever was out there had realized they'd been heard. I couldn't see anything at first. The darkness beyond my window was thick, the kind that swallows shapes whole. I considered calling the police, but hesitated. What would I say? There's someone tapping on my window in a neighborhood that's known for being safe? I didn't want to sound paranoid. I told myself it was a raccoon or a stray animal. The next morning, I inspected the area around my house. Nothing seemed out of place. No footprints, no broken glass, no signs of intrusion. My mind tried to dismiss it as a one-time occurrence, a trick of the night, but something about the sound didn't sit right with me. It had intent. Over the following week, the tapping returned almost nightly. It was never violent, never forced, but always deliberate. I started noticing subtle details that I hadn't before. Small scratches on the outer windowsill, leaves knocked into odd patterns, shadows that seemed to linger a fraction too long when the streetlights flickered. It was as if something or someone was studying me, mapping my routines, learning the rhythm of my life. Then came the footsteps. One night, I was working at my desk, headphones in, late into the early hours. The apartment was silent except for the hum of my computer. Suddenly, heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed down the hallway. I froze, pulling my headphones off. The steps stopped just outside my bedroom door. My pulse spiked. Whoever it was, they were close, too close. I told myself it was my imagination, a stress-induced hallucination. But then came the bangs, 3 quick, deafening thuds against the door, as though someone had tried to break in. I bolted upright, heart hammering, Every rational thought screamed that I should run, hide, call for help. But the door didn't budge, and when I peered through the peephole, there was no one there. No sign of anyone having been in my apartment at all. I checked every corner, every closet, every possible hiding spot. Empty, locked, secure. And yet I knew with absolute certainty that someone had been there. The next few days were a blur of fear and hyper-awareness. I checked locks obsessively, moved furniture to block potential entrances, and even considered installing cameras. But the oddest thing was the lingering sensation that I was being watched, not just inside my apartment, but outside as well. Shadows darted across the periphery of my vision when I walked down the street. Cars would slow as I passed, then speed away. It was subtle, but unnerving. I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe I was just anxious, letting my imagination run wild in a new town. Perhaps the isolation had made me paranoid. But the scratching on the windowsill, the rhythmic tapping, the footsteps, those were real. I had felt them, seen their effects, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the intruder wasn't random. They knew my space intimately, even when I didn't. One evening, I decided to confront my fear directly. I stayed awake, sitting by the window, flashlight in hand. Midnight came and went. Then, around 2:25 a.m., the tapping began. Slow, measured. I held the light steady, scanning the yard and the street beyond. At first, nothing appeared. Then, in the corner of my vision, a figure moved, human-shaped, slender, and fast. I swung the flashlight toward it and froze. The figure was standing just beyond the edge of my yard, crouched like it was waiting, watching. I could barely make out the contours of a face, shadowed and indistinct, but the presence was undeniable. My chest tightened, breath coming in shallow gasps. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused. The figure remained perfectly still, then just as quickly was gone. No sound, no footsteps, no evidence of movement, just vanished into the night. I spent the rest of the night in a tense haze, flashlight ready, ears straining for the slightest noise. Nothing returned. By dawn, exhaustion finally took me, and I collapsed on the couch rather than the bed, too afraid to retreat to my room. The following morning, I inspected the yard. There were no footprints, no marks in the grass, nothing. It was as if the figure had never been there. But I knew better. I had seen it, felt its intent, and the realization settled heavily on me. I was being watched by someone who could move through the night like a ghost, unseen but ever present. That week passed slowly. Every night I sat by the window, waiting, flashlight in hand, listening for any movement. The tapping became more frequent, more urgent, though still without any clear pattern. I started noticing small details around the apartment changing subtly. Objects slightly moved, doors not fully shut, the faintest impressions on the floor like something had pressed against it and vanished. Then, one night, the scratching escalated. It was no longer outside, it was inside my apartment, coming from the living room. My pulse raced. I gripped a heavy flashlight, creeping toward the noise. It stopped as I entered the room. The apartment was empty, again. Locked, secure. And yet the evidence was there, the unmistakable trace of someone having been present. I realized at that moment that I was no longer dealing with a simple intruder. This was something different. Someone or something was crossing the threshold of my life, invading my space, but never leaving tangible proof. It was intimate, personalized, deliberate, and it was learning me, learning my routines, my fears, my vulnerabilities. I returned to the window that night, heart pounding, flashlight in hand. I knew the figure would return. It had to. I didn't know why, but I had a sick certainty that the worst was yet to come. As I sat there, I whispered to myself, almost hoping someone or something would hear. I'm ready. That night, I stayed by the window until the early hours, my flashlight slicing through the darkness. Around 2 a.m., the tapping started again, soft at first, then gradually increasing in intensity. My hands were shaking as I held the light steady,
scanning every shadow, every corner of the yard. And then I saw it. A figure crouched at the edge of my property, just beyond the yard lights. Human-shaped, slender, and disturbingly still, watching me. My stomach turned to ice, but I forced myself to keep looking. The figure moved with impossible speed, darting toward the side of the house. My heart pounded. I ran to the back door and peered out, but there was nothing. My yard was empty, the shadows just shadows. I slammed the door shut, double-checked the locks, and sat on the couch, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But I knew better. The scratches on the windowsill, the subtle shifts of objects in my apartment, the tapping, it was all too real. Sleep was impossible that night. Every creak, every distant sound made me flinch. I barely remember dozing off, but when I woke, the sunlight felt like a fragile shield against the darkness that haunted the night. I spent that day reinforcing the doors and windows, moving furniture, and placing heavy objects where the figure could potentially hide. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already inside, waiting, learning. The following nights were worse. The tapping evolved into a slow, deliberate knocking at the front door. Sometimes it came in the middle of the night, sometimes closer to dawn. I started leaving lights on, but it didn't seem to matter. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't deterred by illumination. I noticed faint footprints in the dew on the driveway, never leading anywhere, vanishing as if erased. One night, it happened again. I was working late at my desk, headphones in, completely absorbed. A sudden noise made me flinch, footsteps pounding down the hallway toward my bedroom. Then 4 hard bangs on the door. My mind raced. This was no imagination. I jumped up, grabbed the nearest heavy object, and bolted toward the door. Nothing. No one. Locked. Secure. My pulse was racing and my hands trembled. How could someone have been there? How could they vanish without a trace? By now, I was exhausted. The constant fear, the near insomnia, and the relentless intrusion had worn me down. I barely ate, barely slept. My focus on work shattered. I considered leaving the house, moving back to the city, but something inside me resisted. I didn't want to give this presence the satisfaction of winning. Then came the night that changed everything. I was sitting by the window again, flashlight in hand, when I heard it. The tapping, and now, faintly, a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, just a hiss of sound, almost like breathing against glass. My hands tightened on the flashlight as the figure slowly emerged from the shadows, closer this time. I could see its outline clearly, hunched and deliberate, moving with an unnatural grace. I realized with a jolt that it wasn't random. This was personal. It had studied me, tracked me, learned my habits, and now it was escalating. The tapping turned into pounding. The whisper became a faint, intelligible threat. I see you. Fear surged through me, but I did something I hadn't done before. I didn't run, I didn't hide. I stood my ground, flashlight aimed directly at the figure. My voice trembled as I shouted, demanding it leave. For a moment, the figure froze, as if surprised by my defiance. Then it vanished, just like that, gone, leaving only the faintest imprint on the glass where its fingers had pressed. The next morning, I called the police and reported everything in detail. They were skeptical, but agreed to perform a thorough sweep. Locked doors, no forced entry, no signs of tampering, just as I had described. Nothing conclusive, no evidence, only my testimony. They suggested security cameras, which I installed immediately. For weeks, the presence didn't return, or at least I didn't see it. The cameras captured nothing unusual, but I felt the eyes on me every time I moved around the apartment. The fear lingered, subtle, persistent. I started changing my routines, staying alert, never letting my guard down. It became a game of anticipation, of constant vigilance. Months passed. Life slowly resumed some semblance of normalcy. I worked, ate, and even ventured out into the town during the day, but nights remained tense. I never saw the figure again, not in person, but sometimes when the wind shifts just right or the shadows stretch in a certain way,
I hear the faintest tapping at my window, a reminder that it's still out there, watching, learning, waiting. I never discovered its identity, its purpose, or how it moved through my apartment with such ease. I may never know. All I can do is stay alert, keep the lights on, and remember that even in a quiet town, solitude isn't always safe. And sometimes the most horrifying intruders aren't the ones you can catch or see. They're the ones who observe from the shadows, perfectly silent, perfectly patient. Because in the end, I realized the most horrifying thing wasn't the tapping, the whispers, or even the presence itself. It was knowing that someone or something had chosen me.